1. Introduction. View the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the eco-design wood stove, and international convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. View purple air. PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to residents against wood smoke emission particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents against wood smoke emission particulates, or ROSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this ROSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning, and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning. Wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, residents against wood smoke emission particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57 DHWC June 4, 2025 Wood smoke from Canadian wildfires approaches the Northeast. In Episode 57 DHWC1 Wisconsin Madison Dane County health officials monitoring federal COVID vaccine limits to Washington, D.C. Public Broadcasting Service PBS. Here's the deal: 46 programs. Trump wants to eliminate 3. Minnesota I did not get it done. A reflective Tim Walz wants to make good. The 2024 Democratic vice presidential nominee has thrown himself into a robust atonement and explanation tour, though aides insist there is no grand strategy. 4 to 8 headlines. 9 Smoke from Canadian wildfires approaches the northeast. Parts of the upper Midwest were under air quality alerts on Tuesday. The New York City region is expected to be at risk on Wednesday. 10 Saying Trump is dangerous is not enough. Bernie Sanders and Biden billionaires and why the Democrats failed. Bernie Sanders 11 From no hope to a potential cure for a deadly blood cancer. Multiple myeloma is considered incurable, but a third of patients in a Johnson & Johnson clinical trial have lived without detectable cancer for years after facing certain death. 12 Dutch government collapses over migration dispute. The populist Geert Wilders withdrew his right-wing Trumpist party from the ruling coalition, saying partners were stalling plans for the strictest migration policy ever. In the Netherlands 13 Ukraine hits bridge linking Crimea to Russia with underwater explosives. Operation severely damaged base of Crimean bridge opened by Putin in 2018. The SBU security service of Kyiv says main content. 1 Wisconsin Madison Dane County health officials monitoring federal COVID vaccine limits accepted by ROSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. Capital Times newsletter June 3, 2025 COVID-19 vaccine at the UW-Madison. Capital Times generic file photo. Dane County residents are vaccinated for COVID-19 at among the highest rates in Wisconsin, with over a third of the population receiving at least one dose through May, but their access to COVID-19 vaccines in the future may become constrained under policy changes led by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The Food and Drug Administration under Kennedy signaled in May it will narrow vaccine access to adults over age 65 and people with certain medical conditions. FDA officials also said they would require vaccine makers to study the safety and effectiveness of vaccines before allowing access to children and younger healthy adults. A week later, Kennedy then announced he would remove guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that recommends COVID-19 vaccination for healthy pregnant people and children. In a video posted on X, the longtime critic of vaccines said he could not be more pleased about the change. Conflicting Kennedy, however, an update May 29 to the CDC recommendations says children may get the COVID-19 vaccine through shared clinical decision-making. The update essentially means healthy children may still receive the vaccine after consulting with a healthcare provider such as a doctor, pharmacist, or nurse, while the update provided more clarity for children older than 6 months. People in higher risk groups including pregnant people remain without a clear formal recommendation from the CDC as of Tuesday. Its adult immunization schedule listed pregnancy as no guidance not applicable for the COVID-19 vaccine under the Biden administration. Federal health officials had recommended an annual COVID-19 vaccine for individuals 6 months and older, with further recommendations based on past vaccination status and age and for people who are immunocompromised. In their announcement last month, FDA officials listed pregnancy as one of the underlying medical conditions warranting COVID-19 vaccine eligibility. The COVID-19 vaccine from this season remains available. New federal limits on the vaccines could affect access this fall, such as changes to insurance coverage. Paying out of pocket for a vaccine can cost around $140 according to the CDC for Dane County healthcare providers and patients alike. The federal policy changes are raising questions about how their access to COVID-19 vaccines could change in fall when viral transmission is typically higher. A spokesperson for Public Health Madison and Dane County said it remains too soon to understand the impact of the changes. What remains more certain, according to the public health spokesperson, is the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. COVID-19 vaccines remain one of the most important tools available to help prevent severe illness. Hospitalization and death due to COVID-19 is especially true for older adults, people with underlying conditions in those with weakened immune systems. Having broad access to these vaccines helps protect the most vulnerable in our community. In January, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services emphasized the importance of updated COVID-19 vaccines, citing flu and COVID-19 vaccines as being formulated for currently circulating viruses. The best way to protect yourself and those around you from respiratory viruses is to get vaccinated. It is never too late, said a respiratory disease epidemiologist for the agency in a statement. Across Wisconsin, Dane County boasts the highest number of residents choosing to receive COVID-19 vaccination for the 2024-2025 season. According to State Department of Health figures, about 35% of county residents received at least one dose as of May, compared to nearly 18% statewide among people under age 65 who may face more limited access to vaccines in the future under the FDA changes. Vaccination rates vary in Dane County. For people age 50 to 64, about 38% have received at least one dose, while about 24% of people aged 18 to 49 have received at least one dose. The chair of the Department of Life Sciences Communication at the University of Wisconsin Madison said social scientists are worried the federal policy changes could instill more distrust in science more broadly. My concern is that if you start with existing distrust in science and giving doubt about these specific vaccines, does that instill a doubt about all the vaccines? So is it opening the door or building that hesitancy? The chair said the whole context is definitely breeding ground for doubt and that we need to closely watch. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a history of anti-vaccine rhetoric, including petitioning the FDA to rescind authorization for COVID-19 vaccinations in 2021 amid a particularly deadly phase of the pandemic. The next year he threatened to sue the FDA if it authorized COVID-19 vaccines for children. The chair said the changes could reduce the personal choice of a person to receive vaccines. This is something that people should, if they are concerned, write to the congressman about. Say that as an individual I want to have the choice to take this vaccine if I want. The chair said we can actually drive our car if we want, and our car is very dangerous, but nobody tells us do not drive a car. So there's the issue of individual choice, and it has also been debated independently of the medical context of restricted vaccines. It is also who has the right to deny the choice. The chair encourages people seeking clear and consistent guidance to keep two things in mind: pre-existing trusted relationships with doctors and collective memory of the impact of vaccines. Talk to your grandmother that knew somebody with polio. Having that collective memory is something very important, and when I talk to people in public media and so on, they go, oh, that is true. We tend to think of the now but think about the historical context, the chair said. The public health spokesperson said local health officials will update the community when they know more and continue working to maintain access to vaccines to the best of our ability. To Washington, D.C. Public Broadcasting Service PBS. Here is the deal: 46 programs Trump wants to eliminate. Excerpts edited by Ross Epp for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. PBS Newsletter, June 4, 2025. Trump has made headlines for pledging to eliminate the Department of Education, but he is not eliminating it yet. Last week we learned that his proposed budget would cut 15% of the funding of the agency next year. His budget says he will wind down the Department of Education. Ultimately, this news came as part of the budget appendix the White House released Friday, which provides 1,224 pages of numbers on how Trump wants Congress to appropriate funds next year. That was part 2 to his 46-page initial or skinny budget proposal. The Trump budget proposal contains many specifics. It is worth reading, but it leaves out some critical information such as the summary tables that usually provide bottom-line cuts and spending amounts for agencies and government. Overall, the Trump budget would eliminate more than 40 programs and agencies. Trump is running the Republican Party and asserting presidential power in ways unseen in American history. At the least, the outline he is presenting here will influence congressional decisions from the White House and Republican perspective. His plan to eliminate some programs underscores that he is pushing for action that others have avoided. Potential critics: many of these programs have vocal advocates who say without them critical oversight, protections and functions will be gone. At the same time, as you will see, this target list is composed mostly of programs with relatively small budgets. Eliminating them saves a sum barely worth mentioning relative to the federal deficit, not the scale many fiscal conservatives hope to see. Example: the largest proposed elimination is the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, a national program that helps people afford heating and Energy bills. It's roughly $4 billion in funding is just 6% of the discretionary budget. Congress controls the Trump elimination list. Here are programs and agencies Trump proposes to eliminate in his budget for perspective. We are including the estimated funding amount for the current year, fiscal year 2025, when the budget provides them economic and jobs programs, economic development assistance programs. This provides some $2 billion in grants to economically struggling communities. Economic Development Administration $113 million. Job Corps more than $1.7 billion. AmeriCorps, officially known as the Corporation for National and Community Service $976 million. Business Development Agency $68 million. Community Service Employment for Older Americans $405 million. The Department of Labor, Bureau of Women, the NASA Office of Science, Tech, Engineering and Math Engagement $143 million. Oversight Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. This office is a watchdog tasked with making sure there is no discrimination in contracting. $111 million. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board $14 million. Health and Living Programs Administration for Community Living, which supports ability of older and disabled Americans to live independently, more than $2.4 billion. U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness $4 million. The Department of Health and Human Services Prevention and Public Health Fund $1.4 billion in funds planned for 2026. Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Trust Fund $338 million. Assistance Programs. LEHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, more than $4.1 billion. Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve $7 million. Refugees and Asylees Cash, Medical and Other Social Services Assistance is eliminated. No summary figure given. Legal and Labor Programs. The Department of Justice Community Relations Service. This division works to mediate and confront community tension. $24 million. Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, which mediates labor disputes. $54 million. Legal Services Corporation, one of the largest funders of civil legal aid in America. $560 million. Media and Communications U.S. Agency for Global Media, which includes Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe. $857 million. Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private nonprofit that distributes federal funding to public media organizations including to NPR and PBS. This would affect local stations and programs like the PBS NewsHour. $595 million. Regional authorities. Delta Regional Authority $41 million. Denali Commission in Alaska $38 million. DC Tuition Assistance Grant Program $40 million. Northern Border Regional Commission $46 million. Great Lakes Authority $5 million. Southeast Crescent Regional Commission $20 million. Southwest Border Regional Commission $5 million. Wildlife State and Tribal Wildlife Grants Program $72 million. Multinational Species Conservation Fund $21 million. Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Fund $5 million. Cooperative Endangered Species Conservation Fund $23 million. In discretionary funding. Marine Mammal Commission $5 million. What happens next? Congress must pass the next funding bill by Sept 30 to avoid a government shutdown. Appropriators in both the House and Senate will go over this list and make their own version of what stays and what goes. It is not typical for Congress to eliminate many agencies or programs, but we are not in a typical year. Fiscal conservatives and Trump are pushing to show that they are slimming the government. White House criticizes GOP senators worried about the national debt. One big question: will Senate Republicans make big changes to the budget bill? Tamara Keith of NPR and Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. With Amy Walter discuss a closer look how lawmakers are restricting citizen-led ballot initiatives. Perspectives. Mississippi governor on how changes to Medicaid and disaster funding could affect his state. 3. Minnesota, I did not get it done. A reflective Tim Walz wants to make good. The 2024 Democratic vice presidential nominee has thrown himself into a robust atonement and explanation tour, though aides insist there is no grand strategy except edited by Ross Epp for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 1, 2025. Nearly 7 months since his ticket lost the 2024 presidential election, Tim Walz Walz is trying all at once to make amends for everything he thinks went wrong. He is going to Republican areas where Democrats lost ground. He is sitting for countless interviews after the former Vice President Kamala Harris campaign limited his media exposure, and as his party engages in collective finger-pointing, he is among the few Democrats admitting that they themselves made mistakes. "I know my job and I did not get it done," Walz, the governor of Minnesota, said last week on a podcast hosted by former Senator Jon Tester, the Montana Democrat. The Tim Walz Atonement and Explanation Tour had its biggest audiences to date on Saturday when he delivered speeches to Democratic Party conventions in South Carolina and California. "This dude is the last guy I want to tell us about. We lost our way. You are the guy who lost," Walz said to the crowd in Columbia, South Carolina on Saturday morning, imagining what listeners might be thinking, but he added, "None of us can afford to shy away right now from asking the hard questions and doing the things we need to do to fix it so that we win elections." His approach stands in stark contrast with how his running mate has dealt with their loss. Ms. Harris gave a paid speech in Australia, appeared at the Met Gala in New York, though she skipped the red carpet and spoke for barely more than 15 minutes to a political group in San Francisco. Even as she weighs a run for governor of California, it was Walz who was the main attraction at the California Democratic convention. He has a lot more freedom than he did last fall. Walz is certainly testing the boundaries of that freedom. Like so many others, he laments the abbreviated nature of the Harris campaign, and after pledging to do whatever Ms. Harris wanted as her running mate, Walz found life as the vice presidential nominee suffocating. A man who was chosen for his skills in television interviews was not allowed to do many of them because it would have highlighted the avoidance of reporters by Harris. "If you think you are just going to do a 60 minutes interview and that is going to get across, boy, that is not it," Walz said on the podcast of Tester, a reference to one of the rare campaign trail interviews by Ms. Harris for all the rending of garments over the 2024 results. The Walz trip to South Carolina also represented something else: his first real post-election effort to speak to black voters, the most critical constituency for any Democrat with presidential aspirations. Each of the last 3 contested primaries of the Democratic Party was won by the candidate Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton and Biden, who consolidated black support across southern primary states. Walz has had limited exposure to southern black Democrats, and his post-election analysis has focused more on the ground the party lost with working-class voters. More broadly, "I do not think that Governor Walz hurt himself mainly because the campaign hit him," said former state representative Bakari T. Sellers, a prominent South Carolina Democrat, in an interview a few days before the state convention. "Democrats, we have no shortage of good ideas," Walz told South Carolina Democrats on Saturday, "but when we get into power we have not been able to get the stuff done, at least not the stuff that people actually care about and feel in their lives." He also urged his party to push back vigorously against Trump. "Maybe it is time for us to be a little meaner, maybe it is time for us to be a little more fierce." As for his plans for 2028, Walz compared his place in the eventual Democratic field to a member of an expedition trying to climb Mount Everest. "No one knew who was going to the summit, it depended on who was ready on summit day," Walz said in the interview. "You get the final camp, you push somebody up. What I'm saying is I want to be part of this team that gets there and pushes whoever it is up to the top." 4 headlines. June 4, 2025. The New York Times: Air pollution from wood-burning smoke from Canadian wildfires approaches the Northeast. The New York Times: Nature and air pollution. Mount Etna erupts in Sicily, sending hikers scrambling for cover. The New York Times: Trump actions after Trump takeover. Kennedy Center ticket sales fall sharply. The New York Times: Trump actions. Justice Department drops Biden era push to obtain the emails of Peter Navarro. Emails. The New York Times: Trump actions during Pride Month. U.S. may strip the name of Harvey Milk from Navy vessel. The New York Times: Trump actions. Opinion can embracing punk save Gen Z and our flailing country. The New York Times: Trump actions. Opinion: no president has wielded the pardon power like Trump has. The New York Times: Trump budget cuts. An illustrated guide to who really benefits from no tax on chips. The New York Times: Trump budget cuts. China really wants to attract talented scientists. Trump just helped. The New York Times: Trump budget cuts. Electricity prices are surging. The GOP mega bill get pushed. The aim higher. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. Late night hopes Trump and Musk can patch things up. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. Some House Republicans have regrets after passing the Trump domestic policy bill. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. Trump asks Congress to claw back $9 billion for foreign aid. NPR and PBS. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. Opinion. The Joni Ernst non-apology on Medicaid needs some work. The New York Times. Trump medicine. Can the UK app help you eat more healthfully? The New York Times. Trump medicine. FDA warns of high risk of illness or death in update of tomato recall. The New York Times. Trump medicine. Trump rescinds Biden policy requiring hospitals to provide emergency abortions. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Consumers are financing their groceries. What does it say about the economy? The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Opinion. Is civil war coming to Europe? The New York Times. Ukraine drone attacks are the new front in war. Can NATO keep up? The New York Times. Ukraine opinion. A small bright spot within the darkness of the Ukraine war. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Opinion. The Trump tariffs are a step toward unbridled presidential power. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Trump live updates. Higher U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum take effect. The New York Times. Ukraine opinion. The Ukraine attack exposed the American Achilles heel. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. Trump wants America to make things again. Does it have what it takes? The New York Times. Trump tariffs. U.S.-China trade war morphs from tariffs into fight over supply chain. The New York Times. 5 headlines. The Guardian. June 4, 2025. Trump actions. Saying Trump is dangerous is not enough. Bernie Sanders on Biden billionaires, and why the Democrats failed U.S. politics. The Guardian. Trump tariffs. The Trump 50 tariffs on foreign steel and aluminum come into effect. Trump tariffs. The Guardian. 6 headlines. The New York Times. June 3, 2025. France and Italy. Macron and Meloni meet searching for unity in a world of conflict. The New York Times. Medicine and Science. Anorexia in middle age and beyond. The New York Times. Medicine and Science. Drinking coffee is associated with a longer, healthier life according to a new study. The New York Times. Medicine and Science. Multiple myeloma. Hope of cure from no hope to a potential cure for a deadly blood cancer. The New York Times. Musk and Tesla and protesters. Elon Musk left the White House, but the Tesla protesters are not finished. The New York Times. Musk opinion. A partial defense of Elon Musk. The New York Times. The Netherlands and Trumpist incompetence collapse. Dutch government collapses after Geert Wilders withdraws. Right-wing party. The New York Times. Poland electoral win for Trumpist whose main power is veto. Liberal Democratic Poland Prime Minister actions. Opinion. Poland just sent an ominous signal to the world. The New York Times. Poland opinion. The emergent Trump doctrine. The New York Times. Trump actions during Pride Month. DuBont Circle Park in Washington to close during Pride event. The New York Times. Trump actions. Opinion. J.D. Vance wanted to aggressively attack American universities. His wish has been the Trump command. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. Acting FEMA chief told staff he did not know about U.S. hurricane season. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts after cuts. The National Weather Service is hiring again. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts as the Trump administration slashes federal spending. Scientists consider leaving the U.S. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. Trump live updates. Elon Musk calls the Trump signature bill an abomination that will swell deficit. The New York Times. Trump budget cuts. United States Forest Service potential privatization. Michael Boren built an airstrip on protected land. Now he might lead the Forest Service. The New York Times. Trump tariffs. How low will the dollar go? The New York Times. Trump tariffs. How our readers are saving money on groceries. Need cooking. Trump tariffs. Opinion. The American novel and gratuitous fiscal crisis. The New York Times. Trump tariffs expected to drag down the global economy. The New York Times. Trumpist science. The White House gutted science funding. Now it wants to correct research. The New York Times. Ukraine hit attack drones in Russia. These videos show what happened next. The New York Times. Ukraine says it struck Crimea bridge. The New York Times. Ukraine drone strike on Russia aims to change the Putin calculus. The New York Times. United States Trump win. Should Republicans have won in a landslide? The New York Times. 7 headlines. The Guardian. June 3, 2025. Africa. Rossep philanthropy could be directed to clean energy heating and cooking in Africa and push away from wood burning for heating and cooking in Africa. From the headline. Bill Gates vows to give most of $200 million fortune to African health and education. Bill Gates. The Guardian. Human interest in robots. These robot cats have glowing eyes and artificial heartbeats and could help reduce stress in children. Robots. The Guardian. Human interest in robots. The granddaughter of Walt Disney denounces animal animatronic tribute as robotic Grandpa Walt Disney Company. The Guardian. Poland presidential election result is a morale boost for MAGA forces in Europe. Catherine de Vries. The Guardian. Poland. The Guardian view on the win by Karol Nawrocki. Poland first perhaps, but Europe comes last. Editorial. The Guardian. Trump actions. Have we passed peak Trump? Kenneth Roth. The Guardian. Trump actions. How to fight back against Trump. Look to movements of poor people. Reverend Dr. Listhea Harrison Gnomes and Weiss back. The Guardian. Trump actions against legal immigrants who are here legally. Millions of lives of legal immigrants upended after Social Security freeze. Trump administration. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts. Elon Musk steps up criticism of Trump budget bill, calling it a disgusting abomination. U.S. politics live Trump budget cuts. Jon Stewart on Elon Musk. Doge has finally rooted out one of the American least efficient government workers. Late night TV roundup. The Guardian. Trump budget cuts. The Guardian view on the Trump big beautiful bill. Reject the con of a class war manifesto. Editorial. The Guardian. Ukraine hits bridge linking Crimea to Russia with underwater explosives. Crimea. The Guardian. United States Trump win. Democratic Party leaders just met for the first time in months. When will they take real action? Norman Solomon. The Guardian. 8 headlines. June 3, 2025. Other human interest. Wisconsin University of Wisconsin Madison. These Badgers play classical music to tap creativity, teamwork. Science and Medicine. UW ranks 30th worldwide in Populist Science and Medicine World University Rankings 2025 Global 2000 list. Core. Trump actions versus personal enemies. Trump signed an executive order accusing him of treason. Now Miles Taylor is fighting back. Trump actions versus personal enemies. Trump rages against Amy Coney Barrett and meltdowns over rulings. Sources. 9 Smoke from Canadian wildfires approaches the northeast. Parts of the upper Midwest were under air quality alerts on Tuesday. The New York City region is expected to be at risk on Wednesday. Source. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Data is as of 7 a.m. Eastern on June 4. Forecast is based on models and may underestimate smoke because of cloud cover or other obstructions. Condors show estimates of wildfire smoke near the surface. Excerpt edited by Rossep for brevity and clarity. In relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. June 4, 2025. Smoke from wildfires raging across Canada is expected to shroud parts of the Northeast on Wednesday, creating airborne pollution and hazy skies that had passed through sections of the upper Midwest on Tuesday. The National Weather Service issued air quality alerts for New York City for Wednesday and many of the surrounding suburbs, including those in New Jersey and most of southern Connecticut. It advised vulnerable groups to stay indoors or limit long stretches of outdoor activity and monitor their health from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and parts of Nebraska and Michigan were under air quality alerts on Tuesday. A meteorologist with the Weather Service Weather Prediction Center said satellite imagery showed smoke stretched from the Dakotas across the Midwest into the Ohio Valley and as far north as New York and as far south as North Florida. On the East Coast, a lot of the smoke is aloft in the atmosphere, so you are not seeing visibility or air quality issues at the surface. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources issued an air quality alert on Tuesday for all of Iowa through 6 a.m. On Thursday, the air quality alert for much of Minnesota remained in effect through noon on Wednesday. According to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the alert for some areas was expected to reach the red category, which signals it can be dangerous for everyone. The agency said wildfires have spread out of control in Canada, displacing thousands of residents and polluting the air. The air quality index in the Twin Cities reached very unhealthy levels on early Tuesday morning before improving by late morning to unhealthy, according to a New York Times air quality tracker. The scale of the index runs from 0 to 500. The higher the number, the worse the air. Both St. Paul and Minneapolis had registered 226 by 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Above 200, the air is considered very unhealthy and all kinds of people would be at risk. By noon, the air quality was indexed at 182, an improvement, but above 150, the air is considered unhealthy and the ill effects might start to be felt by people who are not insensitive. Groups' images on social media showed hazy skies above St. Paul early Tuesday, with some people reporting damp campfire-like smells mixing with the rain in the area. The Canadian wildfire season got off to a grand start last month when 2 people were killed in the province of Manitoba as a wildfire raged, forcing the evacuation of an entire town last week in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, neighboring provinces in the Canadian prairies. Dozens of wildfires spread out of control, displacing thousands of residents. A cold front was dragging smoke smoke from the large wildfires across the border into the states and Marquette, which sits on the shore of Lake Superior on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and was under an air quality advisory on Tuesday. The store manager at a clothing and gift shop said a heavy smell of smoke and a thick haze rolled in around 1130 nm. You cannot even see down the street, she said, adding that the haze obstructed the view down to the lake, which is about a block from the store. The smell of smoke outside remained powerful, she added, saying Trump is dangerous is not enough. Bernie Sanders on Biden billionaires and why the Democrats failed. Bernie Sanders, the senator and twice Democratic presidential hopeful, is on tour with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez trying to build a new progressive movement. He reveals why he thinks Republicans are scared to speak up and what went wrong for Kamala Harris in 2024. Excerpt edited by Rossap for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization The Guardian, June 4, 2025. I think what Trumpism is about is an understanding that the system in America is not working for working class people, says Bernie Sanders in a phony, hypocritical way. Trump has tapped into that. His quote-unquote solutions will only make a bad situation worse. In person, the 83 years of Bernie Sanders read differently than in photograph, perhaps because of how conversational he is. His voice is magnetic with a Brooklyn accent that feels both warm and tough. But what I have been aware of, and I have talked about it for years, is that in America the very richest people are doing phenomenally well while 60% of our people live paycheck to paycheck. Later he will say the same thing to an audience in London, only with more emphasis and passion. 60%. 60. Do you know what paycheck to paycheck means? It is exhilarating to hear Sanders speak to a crowd. His ill is reflected back in their faces. His moral clarity is such a relief, set against the cynicism and resignation of most of the opposition of the Democratic Party to Trump and his administration. Class war is as old as time, but it is a peculiarity of this age that you rarely hear a politician name it. I do. He tells me there is a class war going on. The people on top are waging that war. It is a look at what could have been. Sanders ran, of course, to be the Democratic presidential candidate in 2016 and again in 2020. The first time there was a real sense in the US and abroad that something incredible might happen, that someone with almost no name recognition, he says, a senator from the small state of Vermont, might successfully challenge Hillary Clinton, whom the party had already anointed. We all know how that worked out. Was it the greatest disappointment of his political life? Well, you are too busy to feel things, he says. You are just working very hard. What is absolutely unequivocal is his criticism of the Democrats, the party he thinks lacks any real progressive promise. What they say is the status quo is working pretty good and we will tinker around the edges, and that is not a message that resonates with working people. He refuses to indulge in any personal ill will towards Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. The most he will voice is a wary resignation about 2020, when his campaign won the first 3 states, primary states, in terms of popular vote. Then the Democratic establishment made sure the other candidates dropped out and they rallied around Joe Biden. You know, that is the world that we live in. We are taking on not just the Republican leadership, we are taking on a Democratic establishment which is tied to elements of corporate America. During the 2024 election, he worked very hard to see that Kamala Harris was elected. I was all over the country and was one of her major surrogates. We begged our campaign to start talking about the needs of working people, but their consultants and the money people behind them thought of another strategy, showing that she was more conservative, that she worked with people like Liz Cheney worked with Republicans, had millionaires going out and saying that she is wonderful. They thought that was the right approach. I did not think that was the approach, and I was public about that. He pauses, and not for effect. It is hard to relive November 2024, but my voice did not carry, he says as he leaves. He strides on ahead, his wife Jane, an activist herself, making small talk with me in his wake. It is not that he is performing vigor in an era where the ages of politicians are relentlessly analyzed. It is just his manner. All this urgent change should have happened yesterday. 11 From no hope to a potential cure for a deadly blood cancer. Multiple myeloma is considered incurable, but a third of patients in a Johnson & Johnson clinical trial have lived without detectable cancer for years after facing certain death. Excerpt edited by Rossap for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 3, 2025. A group of 97 patients had long-standing multiple myeloma, common blood cancer that doctors consider incurable and faced a certain and extremely painful death within about a year. They had gone through a series of treatments, each of which controlled their disease for a while, but then it came back as it always does. They reached the stage where they had no more options and were facing hospice. They all got immunotherapy in a study that was a last-ditch effort. A third responded so well that they got what seems to be an astonishing reprieve. The immunotherapy developed by Legend Biotech, a company founded in China, seems to have made their cancer disappear, and after 5 years it still has not returned in those patients, a result never before seen in this disease. These results in patients whose situation had seemed hopeless has led some battle-worn American oncologists to dare to say the words potential cure. Taking the Legend CAR-T was difficult, she said. She had spent nearly 3 weeks in the hospital, but since that treatment 6 years ago she has no sign of cancer. She said it was still difficult for her to believe her myeloma is gone. Myeloma experts applauded the results. Like treatments for many other cancers, treatments for multiple myeloma come with a high price. The drugs are hideously expensive, Dr. June said, costing more than $100,000 a year. The total cost over the years can be millions of dollars, Dr. June said, usually paid by insurers, and it does not even cure you. CAR-T is expensive too. The CARVAC list price is $555,310, but it is a one-time treatment, and more important, the hope is that perhaps by giving it earlier in the course of the disease it could cure patients early on. Johnson & Johnson is now testing that idea. A myeloma expert at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute who was not involved with the study said that if the treatment is used as a first-line treatment, cure is now a realistic expectation. That at least is the hope, the doctor said, and for those like the patients in the new study who are living at least 5 years so far without disease, the outcome really is eye-popping. The doctor said that is getting to a point where you wonder if it will ever come back. He added 12 Dutch government collapses over migration dispute. The populist Geert Wilders withdrew his right-wing Trumpist party from the ruling coalition, saying partners were stalling plans for the strictest migration policy ever in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders, the far-right Trumpist leader of the biggest political party in the Netherlands, announced his decision on social media. Excerpts edited by Rosep for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 3, 2025. The governing coalition in the Netherlands collapsed on Tuesday after the populist leader Geert Wilders withdrew his party over a dispute about migration policy, ending a rocky 11-month rule by the first far-right government in the Netherlands and triggering early elections. The move by Wilders shows how the debate over an authorized migration continues to roil European politics a decade after a large-scale influx of people fleeing wars or seeking better economic opportunities unsettled the region. The collapse of the coalition was confirmed by Prime Minister Dick Schoof, who said he would present his resignation to King Willem Alexander. He said he would stay on as the leader of a caretaker administration without the party of Wilders until elections and the formation of a new government. I think it is unnecessary and irresponsible, Schoof said of the decision of Wilders. It was not immediately clear when new elections would take place, but they appeared unlikely to happen before October, plunging the country into political uncertainty for at least the rest of the year. The party of Wilders has been dropping in Dutch polls lately. Wilders announced the withdrawal of his Party for Freedom from the four-party coalition on X, saying it was because of the refusal of his partners to sign off on a new list of proposals to curb migration and no signature for our migration plan. He said the political crisis comes as the Netherlands prepares to host a NATO summit on June 24 and 25. Caroline van der Plas and Napoleon van Vroonhoven, the leaders of the other two governing parties, called the decision of Wilders irresponsible. He is not putting the Netherlands first, he is putting Geert Wilders first, said Ms van der Plas, the leader of the pro-farmer party, and I blame him for that. 13. Ukraine hits bridge linking Crimea to Russia with underwater explosives. Operation severely damaged base of Crimean bridge opened by Putin in 2018. The SBU Security Service of Kyiv says. Excerpts edited by Rosep for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 non-profit organization. The Guardian, June 3, 2025. Ukraine has detonated a massive underwater blast targeting the Kyiv road and rail bridge connecting the Russian-occupied occupied Crimean peninsula to Russia, damaging its underwater supports. The operation, for which the SBU Security Service of Kyiv claimed responsibility, is the second high-profile operation by Ukraine in days, striking significant Russian assets after a sophisticated drone raid on the Moscow strategic bomber fleet on Sunday. The attack came as Ukraine confirmed it had been invited to the NATO summit later this month, after President Volodymyr Zelensky said it would be a victory for Russia if it was not present the latest strike on the 12-mile-long Kerch Bridge, a prestige project of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, which he opened in 2018, comes amid what appear to be determined efforts by Ukraine to change the narrative promoted by the Trump administration that Kyiv holds few cards in the war. The mining of the bridge, which is heavily defended by Russian forces, follows the audacious long-range drone attack on air bases deep inside Russia, which Zelensky claimed had damaged 34% of the Russian strategic cruise missile carriers. In a further development on Tuesday, the Russian State Investigative Committee accused Ukraine of carrying out acts of terrorism by blowing up 2 railway bridges in Russia over the weekend. 7 people were killed and 113 injured, including children, when 2 trains crashed as a result of the attacks. A Russian rocket attack on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy on Tuesday killed at least 4 people and wounded 25, officials said. Zelensky denounced the assault, saying it underscored the fact that Moscow had no intention of halting the war. The SBU said the operation against the Kerch Bridge had been planned for several months and involved the equivalent of more than a metric ton of TNT, which it said had severely damaged the base of the bridge supports. It is the 3rd time Ukraine has targeted the key logistics route since the Moscow full-scale invasion in 2022. In October 2022, a truck exploded on the bridge, while in July 2023 the SBU said it had blown up part of the bridge using an experimental naval drone. Both times Russia repaired the damaged sections. Lieutenant General Vasyl Malyuk of the SBU, who supervised the latest operation, described the bridge as an absolutely legitimate target. The enemy used it as a logistical artery to supply its troops. Crimea is Ukraine, and any manifestations of occupation will receive our tough response. The White House said that Trump was open to the idea of a summit, which is also backed by Zelensky and by the President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The Zelensky attendance at the NATO summit in The Hague from 24 to 26 June was welcomed by the Ukrainian president after reported misgivings over the potential for the renewal of friction between Zelensky and Trump administration officials. We were invited to the NATO summit. I think this is important, Zelensky said on Monday after he held a meeting with the Secretary General of NATO Mark Rutte in Vilnius.
One introduction. Rozep view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning, replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. Rozep view: purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.